Hey, my name is Jeff Miller, and I'm the author of Old Man's Strength. You can get this book on Amazon at the link below. This is a book about aging well, and I'm spending a few minutes each week talking about a chapter of the book. And today's chapter is chapter 6. It's titled, I Am Cooperating with My Limits. At the beginning of the book, I quote a well-known Star Trek hero, Captain Jean-Luc Picard. He says, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness, that is life." I have a little girl who is 16 now, and she has had a hard life. And part of that is that she was born nearly dead, has had 13 surgeries on a bunch of her organs, lived on a feeding machine for 9 years of her life. And as a result of all that, she has a bunch of scars all over her abdomen from various surgeries on her lungs, stomach, intestines, etc. One of them's particularly long. It's about 2 inches long, right under her armpit, kind of in the rib cage area. And last year we were going to the pool to swim, and she usually covers that scar up with a bathing suit. And this time she had one that was just a little bit lower where it wasn't covering the scar. And I said to her, I said, "Abby, I see that you've got your scar out." And she said, "Dad, scars are cool. I've earned it." And it was really neat seeing her get to a place where she was no longer ashamed or scared or wanting to hide that imperfection. Maybe we could say, perceived weakness of her life. And that's what chapter 6 is about. It's about cooperating with our limits. Limits come in life. Maybe if you're young, you don't realize or appreciate that that could happen to you. But because of tragedy, because of loss, because of physical things that happen to us, and just even the overexertion of ourselves physically, mentally, in whatever way in relationships, we run up into limits. And I don't think as humans, especially in the first world, we're very good at dealing with our limits. We tend to, they say in the third world, tragedy and limits and difficulties happen, and they adapt to them. But in the first world, we overcome them. And that's not all bad. We need to overcome, but there is a time when a limit comes up against you that you just can't fight back against. And then the question is, am I going to spend my life kind of still identifying with all my success, this idealized version of how life should be? Or am I going to accept that maybe I won't win every time? And, rather than hiding my weaknesses, maybe accepting my weaknesses and even my failures as things that I can learn from, rather than, things that will mark me forever as being a failure in my own eyes or in the eyes of others. And even, we talk about old man strength and my gray hair, is that a sign? Is it a threat? Do I see age and even death as a threat? Or do I see and embrace it as something that is inevitable and that even is good, and that I can learn from and change my values and my strategy of how I'm going to live the rest of my life as I age? And, this whole chapter is just about embracing our limits, so that we can grow rather than just continue to identify maybe with what isn't, and learn how to identify and live in what is. And, there's a term that I learned when the pandemic happened 5 or 6 years ago in 2020. And it was a phrase called hinge events. A hinge event is something that sort of changes everything. The pandemic was a hinge event. The advent of the internet was a hinge event. World War II was a hinge event. And, hinge events, it's sort of like the trajectory of our life is going this way, and suddenly a hinge event happens and it turns us, and we're suddenly going in a different direction, and we can't control it. So the question is, when hinge events happen, it tends to bring out the worst of people, but it also tends to bring out the best of people. And the challenge is when we hit that hinge event in our lives that shows us our limits, what happens to us? Do we become a worse person or a better person? That's what this chapter is all about. I'll leave you with a final quote, and I also have this quoted in chapter 6. This is Thomas Merton, and he speaks to this in this way. "If I had a message to my contemporaries, it is surely this: be anything you like, be madmen drunks and bastards of every shape and form, but at all costs avoid one thing: success. If you're too obsessed with success, you will forget how to live. If you've learned only how to be a success, your life has probably been wasted. I'm learning to cooperate with my limits. It'll make you a better person. Check out my book on Amazon. I appreciate you watching this, and God bless you. May His peace be with you today.